The Dead Friends, Call Part 1. It was a stormy night, the kind that makes you double-check if you've locked all the doors and windows. I was sitting in my dimly lit living room, the only sound being the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window pane. My phone, placed on the coffee table, buzzed suddenly. I jumped, my heart racing from the unexpected noise. The screen displayed an unknown number. Hesitantly, I picked up the call. "Hello?" I answered, my voice shaky. "Hey, it's me. Jason," came a familiar voice from the other end. I felt a chill run down my spine. Jason had been my best friend throughout high school. We'd lost touch after graduation, and then 2 years ago he died in a car accident. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "This isn't funny. It's really me, man," the voice insisted. "I need your help. I don't have much time. Please, just listen." I was too stunned to speak. The voice, the tone, everything was exactly like Jason's. It was uncanny. "I'm stuck, and I need you to come to the old abandoned house on Maple Street," he continued. "You remember that place, right? Where we used to hang out?" "Yeah," I whispered, the memories flooding back. We had spent countless nights in that dilapidated house, drinking, smoking, and talking about our future. "Meet me there tomorrow night," Jason said. "And Alex, don't tell anyone." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, clutching the phone, my mind racing. Could this really be Jason? How could it be? He was dead. The next day passed in a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified. By the time evening rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves. As night fell, I made my way to the old house on Maple Street. The wind howled and the trees swayed ominously. The house loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. I hesitated at the front gate, my heart pounding in my chest. This was insane. What was I doing here? But then I heard it, a faint whisper calling my name. "Alex." I pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of decay and mildew. I made my way through the overgrown yard to the front door, which creaked open with an eerie groan. Inside, the house was just as I remembered, only now it was covered in dust and cobwebs. "Jason?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. "Up here," came the reply from upstairs. I climbed the creaky staircase, each step feeling like a weight on my soul. At the top, I turned towards the room we used to hang out in. The door was ajar, and inside a single candle flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Jason stood there, looking just as he did the last time I saw him. But there was something off. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were hollow. "Alex," he said, his voice a mere whisper. "Thank you for coming." I stepped closer, my mind racing with questions. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I don't have much time," he replied, ignoring my question. "I need you to do something for me. There are others like me trapped, unable to move on. You have to help us find peace." "How?" I asked, feeling a cold dread creeping over me. "There's a book," Jason explained, "in the library downtown. It has the answers. You need to find it and bring it here." "Okay," I said, not fully understanding but too terrified to argue. "I'll find the book." Jason nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "Thank you, Alex. You don't know what this means to me." With that, the candle flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. When I turned on my flashlight, Jason was gone. I stumbled out of the house, my mind reeling. As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now part of something much larger and much more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Part 2. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. Jason's words echoed in my mind, along with the unsettling image of his hollow eyes. It was like a dark cloud hung over me, a constant reminder that I was now entangled in something supernatural. When night fell again, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to find that book. The library downtown was an old Gothic building that had always given me the creeps. Its tall, narrow windows seemed to watch me as I approached, and the gargoyles perched on the roof looked ready to pounce. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The librarian, an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes, glanced up from her desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and raspy. "I'm looking for a book," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know the title, but it's about spirits and how to help them find peace." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she was going to refuse. Then she nodded slowly. "Follow me," she said, rising from her chair. She led me through the maze of shelves to a section in the back of the library. The books here were old and dusty, their covers faded and worn. She reached up to a high shelf and pulled down a thick, leather-bound volume. "This might be what you're looking for," she said, handing it to me. I took the book, feeling its weight in my hands. The cover was plain, with no title or author. I opened it and saw that the pages were filled with strange symbols and illustrations. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The librarian gave me a knowing look. "Be careful," she warned. "Some things are best left undisturbed." I nodded and hurried out of the library, clutching the book tightly. As I walked home, I felt a growing sense of unease. The streets were eerily quiet, and every shadow seemed to move in the corner of my eye. By the time I reached my apartment, I was practically running. Once inside, I locked the door and sat down at my kitchen table, opening the book again. The symbols and illustrations seemed to dance on the page, making it hard to focus. I took a deep breath and started to read. The book was filled with stories of restless spirits, souls trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Each story was more horrifying than the last, detailing the lengths to which these spirits would go to find peace. As I read, I began to understand what Jason needed me to do. I spent hours poring over the book until my eyes burned and my head ached. Finally, I found what I was looking for, a ritual that promised to help spirits find closure. It was complicated, involving candles, symbols, and a specific incantation. I copied down the instructions and gathered the materials I needed. That night, I returned to the old house on Maple Street. The wind howled, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets as I made my way through the overgrown yard. I felt a presence watching me, but I pushed the fear aside and focused on the task at hand. Inside the house, I set up the ritual in the room where I had seen Jason. I placed candles in a circle and drew the symbols from the book on the floor. My hands shook as I lit the candles and began to recite the incantation. At first, nothing happened. The candles flickered, and the room was filled with an oppressive silence. Then I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin, and the shadows in the room began to move. "Alex," Jason's voice whispered, echoing from all directions. "I'm here," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm doing what you asked." The shadows coalesced into a figure Jason, looking more solid and real than before. He stepped into the circle of candles, and I saw others behind him, their faces twisted in anguish. "Thank you," Jason said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've given us a chance." The other spirits moved closer, their eyes filled with hope. I continued the incantation, my voice growing stronger. The symbols on the floor began to glow, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the spirits were gone, and the house felt lighter. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. It was over. Jason and the others were at peace. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There were more spirits out there, more restless souls in need of help. And somehow, I knew that my involvement in this supernatural conspiracy was far from over. Part 3. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason and the other spirits, their hollow eyes pleading for help. When morning came, I was groggy and disoriented, but I knew I had to figure out what to do next. There had to be more to this than just one ritual. Jason's call for help felt like the start of something bigger, something darker. As I sat with my coffee, the book from the library lay open on the table. I flipped through the pages, trying to decipher the strange symbols and illustrations. There was a sense of urgency in the air, like a ticking clock I couldn't ignore. The book mentioned other rituals, other ways to help spirits find peace, but it also hinted at something more, a hidden truth, a dark secret buried deep within the supernatural world. The next few days were a blur of research and paranoia. I went back to the library, scouring the shelves for anything that might give me a clue. The librarian watched me with those piercing blue eyes, but she didn't say anything. It felt like she knew what I was looking for, and that she was waiting for me to find it on my own. One evening, as I was buried in yet another dusty tome, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I read the message. "You can't stop now. They're counting on you. Meet me at the cemetery at midnight." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Who was this? How did they know what I was doing? And why the cemetery of all places? I didn't have time to second-guess myself. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the book into my bag, and headed out into the night. The cemetery was a few miles outside of town, a sprawling expanse of tombstones and crypts shrouded in darkness. As I approached the entrance, I felt a chill run down my spine. The gates creaked open and I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily among the graves. "Is anyone here?" A figure stepped out from behind a large tombstone, and I instinctively took a step back. The figure moved into the beam of my flashlight, revealing a woman in her late 30s with long dark hair and piercing green eyes. She wore a long, flowing dress that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "You must be Alex," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "My name is Evelyn," she replied. "I know what you're going through. I've been through it myself." "How do you know about Jason?" I demanded. "How do you know what I'm doing?" Evelyn sighed and gestured for me to follow her. "It's a long story. Come, let's walk." We made our way through the cemetery, the gravestones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Evelyn began to explain, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jason isn't the only one," she said. "There are many spirits trapped in this world, unable to move on. They need our help to find peace, but there's more to it than just performing rituals. There's a darkness lurking beneath the surface, a force that's keeping these spirits bound to this world." "What kind of force?" I asked, feeling a sense of dread. "A malevolent entity," Evelyn replied. "It's been around for centuries, feeding on the suffering of lost souls. It manipulates the living, using them to keep the spirits trapped. Jason's call for help was just the beginning. You're part of something much larger, Alex, something that could change everything." We stopped in front of a large, ornate mausoleum. Evelyn turned to face me, her green eyes intense. "Inside this mausoleum is a key to unlocking the truth, but it's dangerous. The entity will do everything in its power to stop you." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "What do I need to do?" Evelyn handed me a small, intricately carved box. "This box contains a talisman that will protect you, but you must find the key and bring it to the old church on the outskirts of town. There, we can perform a ritual to weaken the entity and free the spirits." I took the box, feeling its cold surface against my skin. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you were chosen," Evelyn replied. "Jason's call for help reached you for a reason. You have a connection to the spirit world, a strength that can help us defeat this darkness." Before I could ask any more questions, Evelyn disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the cemetery. I stood there, clutching the box, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. This was more than I had bargained for, but there was no turning back now. I made my way to the mausoleum, my flashlight flickering as I approached the heavy iron door. It creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with crypts. As I ventured deeper into the mausoleum, the temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin. My flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could hear faint whispers, like distant echoes of voices long gone. In the center of the mausoleum, I found a large stone sarcophagus. The lid was adorned with intricate carvings, and a strange symbol was etched into the surface. I recognized it from the book, a symbol of power and protection. With trembling hands, I pushed the lid aside, revealing a small ornate box inside. I reached for the box, but as soon as my fingers touched it, the room seemed to come alive. Shadows danced on the walls, and a cold wind swirled around me. I felt a presence, something dark and malevolent, watching me. "Leave this place," a voice hissed, echoing through the mausoleum. "You do not belong here." Ignoring the voice, I grabbed the box and clutched it tightly. The wind grew stronger, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I could feel the entity's anger, its determination to stop me. Summoning all my courage, I turned and ran, the whispers and shadows chasing me. I burst out of the mausoleum and into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the cemetery, where I collapsed, gasping for breath. As I sat there, clutching the box, I knew that my journey was far from over. The entity was real, and it would do everything in its power to stop me. But I couldn't back down now. Jason and the other spirits were counting on me. I had to find the key, perform the ritual, and put an end to this darkness once and for all. Part 4. The box felt heavier with every step as I made my way back home. It was almost as if the weight of the task ahead was physically manifesting itself. The streets were eerily quiet, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, flickering with each passing streetlight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following me. Once home, I locked the door and drew all the curtains, trying to create a barrier between myself and whatever darkness lurked outside. I placed the box on the kitchen table and sat down, staring at it for what felt like hours. The intricate carvings seemed to pulse, almost like they were alive. Finally, I gathered the courage to open it. Inside was a small, ancient-looking key made of tarnished silver. Alongside it lay a piece of parchment covered in symbols and instructions. My eyes scanned the text, trying to make sense of the strange language. It described the ritual in more detail, warning about the entity's attempts to disrupt it. Suddenly my phone buzzed, making me jump. It was another message from the unknown number, the church. Midnight. Be prepared. I looked at the clock. It was already 11 p.m. Panic and determination surged through me as I grabbed the key and the parchment, stuffing them into my bag. There was no time to lose. The old church on the outskirts of town was a relic from another era, abandoned and forgotten. It stood amidst overgrown weeds and towering trees, its silhouette looming against the dark sky. As I approached, I saw a faint light flickering through the broken, stained glass windows. Someone was already inside. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, I stepped into the nave. Candles lined the altar, casting an eerie glow on the cracked walls. Evelyn stood at the front, her eyes fixed on me. "You made it," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "Did you bring the key?" I nodded and handed it to her. She took it with reverence, placing it in the center of a circle drawn on the floor in white chalk. Symbols from the book surrounded it, glowing faintly in the candlelight. "We don't have much time," Evelyn said, her eyes scanning the parchment I had brought. "The entity will try to stop us. You need to recite the incantation while I perform the ritual." I took a deep breath, nodding. "I'm ready." We began the ritual, our voices intertwining as we chanted the ancient words. The air grew thick with energy, the candles flickering wildly. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, casting an otherworldly light across the room. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and a chilling wind swept through the church. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, forming into grotesque shapes. I felt a presence, dark and suffocating, closing in on us. "Keep going!" Evelyn shouted over the howling wind. "Don't stop!" I focused on the incantation, my voice trembling but determined. The entity's presence grew stronger, its whispers filling my mind with doubt and fear. I could see shadowy figures advancing towards us, their hollow eyes gleaming with malevolence. "Alex, look out!" Evelyn cried. I turned just in time to see one of the figures lunging at me. I stumbled back, raising my hands defensively. The talisman Evelyn had given me glowed brightly, and the figure recoiled, hissing in pain. I swung the talisman in front of me, driving the shadows back. "Keep reciting," Evelyn urged. "We're almost there." I resumed the incantation, my voice growing stronger with each word. The key in the center of the circle began to glow, its light piercing through the darkness. The shadows screamed in agony, their forms dissolving into nothingness. Suddenly, the wind stopped, and the church fell silent. The key floated into the air, emitting a blinding light that filled the room. Evelyn and I shielded our eyes, unable to look directly at it. When the light faded, the key lay on the floor, its glow now dim but steady. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. "We did it," Evelyn said, her voice filled with relief. "The entity is weakened. The spirits can finally find peace." I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. It was over. The darkness had been pushed back, and the spirits were free. But as I looked at Evelyn, I saw a shadow of concern in her eyes. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "The entity will return, stronger than before. We need to be ready." I nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. This battle was won, but the war was far from over. Jason's call for help had set me on a path I could never have imagined, and there was no turning back now. As we left the church, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, I felt a sense of resolve. There were more spirits out there, more battles to be fought, and I would be ready. Part 5. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and constant vigilance. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was still watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Evelyn and I met frequently, poring over the ancient texts, trying to decipher more ways to protect ourselves and the spirits we were bound to help. One evening, while I was researching in my apartment, a sudden chill filled the room. The lights flickered, and my phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "They're coming for you. Be ready." I jumped up, my heart racing. I grabbed the talisman and the key, stuffing them into my bag. Just as I was about to leave, the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. They twisted and elongated, forming dark, menacing shapes. "Alex!" a voice hissed, echoing around me. "You can't escape us." I bolted out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me. The shadows followed, creeping along the walls and floor. I ran down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and burst out into the night. I needed to find Evelyn. She was the only one who could help me now. As I raced through the darkened streets, I felt the entity's presence growing stronger. It was like a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The shadows around me writhed and twisted, their whispering voices filling my mind with fear. Finally, I reached Evelyn's house, pounding on the door with all my might. She opened it, her eyes wide with concern. "Alex, what's wrong?" she asked, pulling me inside. "They're coming," I gasped. "The entity, it's here." Evelyn's face paled, but she nodded resolutely. "We need to perform another ritual. This time, we must bind the entity, weaken it further." We hurried to her living room, where she had already set up a circle of candles and drawn symbols on the floor. I handed her the key and the talisman, and she placed them in the center of the circle. Together, we began to chant the incantation, our voices merging in the dimly lit room. The air grew thick with energy, and the shadows outside the windows pressed against the glass, trying to break through. The candles flickered wildly, casting eerie light on the walls. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a suffocating darkness that threatened to consume us. Suddenly, the front door flew open and the shadows poured into the room. Evelyn and I stood our ground, chanting louder, trying to push back the darkness. The talisman glowed brightly, but the entity's power was immense, and it seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. "Keep going!" Evelyn shouted over the cacophony of whispers. "We can't let it win!" The shadows swirled around us, and I felt icy tendrils wrapping around my arms and legs, pulling me towards the center of the circle. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to keep chanting, focusing on the words of the incantation. As the key and talisman glowed brighter, the shadows screamed in pain, their forms disintegrating into wisps of smoke. The entity's presence wavered, and I could feel its grip loosening. With one final, desperate effort, Evelyn and I shouted the last words of the incantation. A blinding light erupted from the circle, filling the room with a radiant glow. The shadows were banished, and the entity's presence vanished, leaving behind a sense of calm and peace. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Evelyn knelt beside me, her face pale but determined. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling. "But this isn't over. The entity will return, and we need to be ready." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. We had won another battle, but the war was far from over. The entity would not rest until it had reclaimed its power, and we were the only ones standing in its way. As we cleaned up the remnants of the ritual, Evelyn handed me a small, leather-bound journal. "This belonged to my mentor," she explained. "It contains knowledge and rituals that will help us in the fight against the entity. Study it and be prepared for what's to come." I took the journal, feeling a sense of responsibility settling over me. The journey that had begun with Jason's call for help had led me into a world of darkness and danger, but I couldn't turn back now. There were spirits in need of help and a malevolent force that needed to be stopped. As I left Evelyn's house that night, I felt a renewed sense of determination. The entity might be powerful, but we had the knowledge and strength to fight back. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. Back in my apartment, I sat down with the journal, flipping through its pages. The symbols and incantations were complex, but I knew that understanding them was crucial to our success. I spent hours studying, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on me. Just as I was about to turn in for the night, my phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from Evelyn. "Meet me at the old church tomorrow. We need to talk about the next step." I sighed, feeling the exhaustion settle in. There was no rest for the weary, it seemed. But as I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. We had survived this far, and we would continue to fight. For Jason, for the spirits, and for the world that depended on us to keep the darkness at bay. Part 6. The next day I made my way back to the old church, the sun hanging low in the sky. The shadows of the trees stretched across the ground, and the building loomed ahead, a stark silhouette against the fading light. My heart pounded as I approached, the weight of our mission pressing heavily on my shoulders. Evelyn was waiting inside, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the candles she had lit around the altar. She looked up as I entered, her expression serious. "Alex, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, moving closer. "What's the next step?" She handed me a worn piece of paper. "This is a map of the town," she explained, pointing to several marked locations. These are places where the entity's presence is strongest. We need to perform binding rituals at each of these sites to weaken its power further. I studied the map, feeling a surge of determination. How do we know the entity won't just come back again? Evelyn's eyes were dark with worry. We don't. But if we weaken it enough, we can trap it permanently. The final ritual will be here at the church. All right, I said, steeling myself. When do we start? Tonight, she replied. We have to move quickly before the entity regains its strength. We gathered our supplies and set out into the night. The first location was an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. The building was decrepit, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. As we approached, I felt a familiar chill in the air. This is it, Evelyn said, her voice steady. Let's begin. We set up the ritual circle, placing candles and drawing symbols on the ground. The wind howled around us, and I could feel the entity's presence, dark and oppressive. We began to chant, our voices merging in the eerie silence. The air grew thick with energy, and the shadows around us seemed to come alive. I saw figures moving in the darkness, their eyes glowing with malevolence. My heart raced, but I kept my focus, reciting the incantation with all my strength. Suddenly the ground beneath us trembled, and a fissure opened, emitting a blinding light. The shadows screamed, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. The light intensified, and I felt a surge of power, like a wave crashing over me. When the light faded, the ground was still, and the oppressive presence was gone. We had succeeded in binding the entity at the first location, but there were still more sites to go. We moved quickly, traveling to each marked location on the map. Each site presented its own challenges, but we persevered, our determination growing stronger with each success. The entity fought back, sending shadows and whispers to try and stop us, but we stood our ground, performing the rituals with unwavering resolve. Finally, we returned to the church for the final ritual. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light through the stained glass windows. Evelyn and I stood in the center of the nave, the map and journal spread out before us. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of hope and fear. "The final binding ritual. If we succeed, the entity will be trapped here, unable to harm anyone again." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." We set up the ritual circle, placing the key and talisman in the center. The air was charged with energy, and I could feel the entity's presence, watching, waiting. We began to chant, our voices strong and unwavering. The ground trembled, and the shadows around us swirled and twisted. The candles flickered wildly, casting eerie light on the walls. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a dark force that threatened to consume us. But we stood our ground, chanting louder, pushing back against the darkness. The key and talisman glowed brightly, their light piercing through the shadows. The entity screamed in rage, its form dissolving into wisps of smoke. With one final desperate effort, we shouted the last words of the incantation. A blinding light erupted from the circle, filling the room with a radiant glow. The shadows were banished, and the entity's presence vanished, leaving behind a sense of calm and peace. We collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. It was over. The entity was trapped, unable to harm anyone again. The spirits could finally find peace. Evelyn and I sat in the nave, catching our breath. The first rays of dawn filtered through the stained glass, casting a warm golden light on the altar. "We did it," Evelyn said, her voice filled with awe. "The entity is bound. The spirits are free." I nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. "What's next?" She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We keep watch. We make sure the entity stays bound and that no other malevolent forces threaten our world." As we left the church, the town bathed in the soft glow of morning, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jason's call for help had led me on an unimaginable journey, one that had tested my courage and resolve, but I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. The battle against the darkness was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the entity and emerged victorious, and I would continue to fight, protecting the spirits and the living from the forces that sought to harm them. As I walked through the quiet streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The sun rose higher in the sky, dispelling the last remnants of night. The journey had been long and harrowing, but it had also shown me the strength I never knew I had. And so, I faced the future with determination, ready to continue the fight against the darkness, knowing that I was not alone.